Further south along the promenade lies Claremont Pier. It was constructed by the Coast Development Company, who operated the famous Bell steamers from London Bridge, offering trips that called at Southend, Clacton and Walton-on-the-Naze. And Lowestoft was one of 3 new piers on the east coast to be built, along with Southwold and Felixstowe. The 600-foot pier was opened on Saturday the 30th of May 1903, with the arrival of the Walton Bell, with admission to the pier costing 1 penny. In 1912 there was an extension and revamping, and a grand pavilion building was added, with the original wooden piles being renewed with greenheart timber. Although steamships had lost a percentage of their revenue due to the advent of the railways, there was still a lucrative market for sailing excursions and pleasure trips. As the pier landing stage allowed for easy mooring facilities, and the pier itself offered numerous entertainments, it was an obvious way forward for the 2 interests to be combined. Steamer services ended in 1939 with the outbreak of the Second World War. An army demolition team were assigned to section the pier for fear of invasion, and like Cromer Pier, a gap was created by blowing up the boards. Once the danger of invasion had passed, the resulting gap in the pier was joined with a Bailey Bridge, and Claremont Pier became an army training centre until 1948. Left abandoned and derelict, the pier was taken over by actor George Studd when the local council declined to purchase it. He undertook repairs and a new concrete platform and pavilion were completed by 1950. But in 1962, a storm washed away the T-shaped head and a portion of the pier neck, reducing its length. And despite further renovations in the 1980s, the seaward end was never to be reopened, and it remains closed today. I'm meeting with David Scott, whose family has owned the pier for many decades. David!
Hello Chris, nice to see you.
Nice to see you
Welcome
too.
to Roxwell Dining Room.
Thank you very much. What a lovely restaurant you've got here.
It's very nice actually. Seafood restaurant, totally seafood, doing very well.
Looking forward to seeing the menu.
Okay. Back in 1971, that my grandfather bought the pier actually. We owned Thrigby Hall Wildlife Park, it was at the time, and we were developing that, and that was meant to be a casino type gaming place. We didn't get planning permission, so we looked to change. George Rose owned this at the time, and the Rose twins as well, and they wanted to do a deal where we exchanged. So they wanted the Thrigby Hall and we wanted the pier, so that's how it came about. I think you've got to reinvent all the time when you're in business as well, and I see the pier not being any different, so you've got to be one step ahead. So we've tried to introduce different businesses to the whole place. Roller skating rink, we've opened an aquarium music venue, 900 capacity, state of the art. We're trying to get on the touring circuit, which we're now succeeding in doing, and trying to put Lowestoft on the map. We did a scheme about 10 years ago when EDA, the East Anglian Development Association, were alive. And the idea was to link us with Southwold Pier with a ferry boat scheme, 50-man crafts, half an hour down the sea road. Southwold people coming to Lowestoft, Lowestoft going to Southwold would have been ideal, and that was forming part of the funding bid. But unfortunately at the time we had 40% of the money, but then EDA disbanded because they actually ran out of cash. With domestic tourism, it's going to come good. I think piers will form part of that revival, and I think the government will start investing in seaside resorts because of the Brexit, the British passion again might come back to resorts, I think. And again, the pier has obviously got to form part of it. So I see, it's investment, and it's a labour of love, but I see it coming good. It's got to have the right things on board there. That's the thing. I mean, piers are part of our heritage, aren't they? I think the thing is, you take a pier away from a seaside resort and it becomes almost barren.
You can no longer stroll along the pier at Claremont, but you can skate part of the way, and events manager Hannah Marks is helping me back on skates after a break of a few decades. Right, Hannah, let's skate. This could be amusing.
Use a walking motion.
Okay, right, yeah, fine. Holding onto the rail. There we go.
Oh, see, you're great already.
Oh! What do you? I can't remember what you used to do. You used to have to. This really is. Oh my! Oh! Ah! Oh! Oh! I remember there used to be a skating rink on Browston Road in Norwich, and I think I must have been, maybe it was the late 60s, early 70s, and that was where you could book a party, and I always remember going there, and they just go round and round and round for sort of 2 hours, and then your mum and dad would come and pick you up. That was it.
Once the disco lights are on and the music, it comes alive.
Oh yes, bit of disco when you're skating.
Yeah.
Right, let's see if we get some speed up on this one. Oh, I'm getting the hang of it now, look. And you handle all the events and weddings?
Events and weddings coordinator, yeah. So any private functions that take place at the different venues on the pier, they come to me.
So what spaces are there here then? Because I know we met David in the Rock Salt restaurant.
Yeah, so Rock Salt Restaurant is one of the venues, and then we've also got the zoo and the aquarium upstairs.
Right.
So we can hold the bigger private functions up there.
Yeah.
And then of course you've got rollers, which you can hire, and then Nemo's restaurant, which is opening for the summer.
Brilliant.
In a month's time.
Great. So a busy job.
Yes, yeah. Lots of different options, packages to suit everybody.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Right. I've got to keep improving my skating. I haven't fallen over yet. The two piers have joined together on one occasion. In 2001, the installation entitled St Elmo's Fire was unveiled by artist David Ward, who'd been commissioned by Lowestoft Council to create a visual link between the two piers. So what of the future for the two Lowestoft piers? David Scott from Claremont has given us his thoughts. What about the local business-led group Lowestoft Vision? It was founded in August 2013 after businesses in the town voted yes to forming a business improvement district.
Lowestoft Vision is very much about economic growth within the town centre, and the town centre is always linked to the tourist industry, and so the piers are very, very important. We'd like to see the piers flourish, of course. The Claremont Pier is doing very, very well. This pier that we're stood on now, the South Pier, needs some work doing. We've got some ideas of what we'd like to do to the pier. The organisation that I'm part of has opened the pier up again 2 years ago, and it's incredible the amount of people that come along here and tell us how important the pier is to them. Whether they met their wife there, or they had their first kiss on the end of the pier, or whatever. And we would like to make sure that those kind of memories continue. I've been in Lowestoft for about 40 years, so no, I didn't grow up here, but I certainly remember the pier 40 years ago, and I used to walk on here with my wife, back in those days, and push my son in his in the pram and the pushchair and what have you. So, yeah, fond memories.
For the Victorians and Edwardians who took the opportunity to visit the piers at Lowestoft, it must have been quite a thrill to stand at the end of the pier admiring the view of your town centre. I think it's fair to say that the heyday of both piers is somewhere in the past, neither of them today offering the rich pickings enjoyed by generations a century ago. But it is still a beautiful beach to admire and a fine view of the most easterly point of the United Kingdom if you do decide to take a stroll along the pier. If, like me, you spent your early childhood summer holidays at the Norfolk coast, then an annual visit to Great Yarmouth was always a bonus. The golden sandy beach, the candy floss on a stick, even a ride on the snails at Joyland.
They've been here since 1949, and with a lick of paint, they're back again. Oh, childhood memories.
The two piers, both constructed in the 1850s and amongst the first built-for-pleasure piers in the country. Join me as I discover their history and the wide variety of entertainment. Our beautiful Norfolk coastline is an attraction for many reasons. The glorious beaches, the stunning scenery, a walk along the cliffs or through the sand dunes, the fresh air that fills our lungs.
And what we can see here actually is where the end of Wellington Pier, which I'm sure you as a young lad jumped off on numerous occasions, is no more.
It was a working pier with ships bringing cargo and passengers and leaving. It was only later that it became the pleasure pier that most seaside piers became in any case.
For many of us, the piers that have stretched out into the North Sea have held a fascination since childhood. A chance to view the town centre from across the water, go crabbing off the end, visit the entertainment centre or theatre.
100 years it's been going on the end of that pier there's been entertainment, and I'm sort of the last in a long line, and there'll be loads and loads of people for another 100 years that follow what I do. That's a fantastic thing, it really is very special.
But who built them and why? When was the pinnacle of their success? And what purpose do they serve today? Join me, Chris Bailey, as I travel to Hunstanton, Cromer, Great Yarmouth and Lowestoft, and take a stroll along the pier. It sits on the most easterly point of the United Kingdom, looking directly across the sea to our Dutch neighbours. There's been a settlement here for over 1,000 years, but much of what we see today has been established only since the 1800s. The Viking origin of the name Lowestoft, made up of the name Lothfa and the suffix toft, which means homestead, points towards the importance of the sea and the people and the products it delivered. In the Domesday Book of 1086, Lowestoft was known as Lothu Wistoft and described as an agricultural village of just 20 families, a sub-manor of Lothingland under the manor of Galston. And over the next 800 years, the rich pickings from the sea brought prosperity to Lowestoft and the population grew.
By the early 19th century, Lowestoft saw a boost in its fishing trade. Not all was well in its rival town for the fishing industry, Great Yarmouth. There'd been an increase in harbour fees, and the opening of a new cut from the River Waveney to the River Yare meant that Norwich merchants preferred to buy from Lowestoft than Great Yarmouth.
Lowestoft became a port in 1837, when the harbour was initially developed by the Norwich and Lowestoft Navigation Company. It became successful 10 years later when Victorian entrepreneur Sir Samuel Morton Peto took it over and gave it new life by building the railway from Ipswich and Norwich, thus opening the whole of England as a market for the town's fresh fish. And here at the Maritime Museum, you can learn a great deal more on its development.
Good morning, Chris. Welcome to the Lowestoft Maritime Museum.
Thank you, Alan. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much.
So it started off with just this little cut here. As the port developed, this was made, and the original fish docks were down here. Prior to the railways coming, as you can imagine, the furthest you could take a horse and cart in a day would be about 20-25 miles. Once the railways came in, you could get anywhere that same day. fresh Lowestoft fish could be on your table in Manchester the same night as it was landed in Lowestoft.
Exports of herring, known locally as the silver darling, grew and grew, and workers were brought in from all over the country to assist in handling the catch, including Scots fisher girls who lodged in houses in the high street and went down the scores, ancient narrow thoroughfares still to be seen today, to gut the herring. Lowestoft was now famous for its herring drifters fishing the North Sea, and also for the trawlers which ventured further in search of cod, haddock and skate. Sailing craft gave way to steam-powered vessels, and the harbour was filled with tugs and smaller-sized merchant vessels.
Jim, good morning.
Oh, good morning, Chris. Are you enjoying your visit to the museum?
I'm thoroughly enjoying my visit, thank you, and I've just had a really good time with Alan, taught me about the development of the port, but I'd really like to have a look at some of your wonderful boats you've got here. So
lovely, yes. We'll
would you
show
take me through?
Yes, certainly.
This is quite an extraordinary collection of vessels. Tell me a little bit about the collection.
Yes, well, we have one big collection of 20 models, all made by one man. It's Alan Thurston collection. We have drifters from the late 1890s, right the way up, which were all sail, and then up to coal and steam. The collection represents as boats sail out to sea.
And it represents the diversity of the various trawlers and boats that went out, didn't it? And at the height of the season, there were sometimes up to 300 vessels?
Drifters within the port, and you could go from one side of the port to the other without having to go ashore. They could just step across the boats. It was that tight. And they used to have to try to be the first one back to land their catch because they would get a higher price. Then they'd like to be the first ones out again, so to get to the best sailing grounds.
Well, it is a remarkable collection, and it does show the richness of the fishing industry that brought Lowestoft such prosperity, didn't it?
Industries ashore supported the fishing industry, and local producers made clothing and foodstuffs for the boats, salt for the curing of herring, and ice for the trawlers, all of which were traded in the town. Around the market, the fish merchants had their offices, buying the catches and arranging onward shipping by rail to parts of Britain and by sea to foreign markets. With all this wealth came other improvements to the town, and Lowestoft became famous for its hanging gardens and fine terraced gardens that descended from the merchants' houses to the base of the cliffs.
So Alan, with the development then of the harbour, as I understand it, the South Pier became the public pier.
That's correct, yes. As you say, this was originally started there, but then they put the South Pier in here. All of this area was then for holidaymakers. So the holidaymakers would then come onto the pier and promenade.
Ah, wonderful.
The South Pier of today dates back to 1846. It had a reading room added in 1854 and a bandstand in 1884. But sadly, they were both destroyed by fire just 1 year later. Another was constructed in the early 1890s, and as the 20th century began, the public could once again stroll along the pier. The whole pier was strengthened with concrete in the mid-1920s, but disaster struck again during World War II when a shell tore through the pavilion during a naval bombardment, so it was refurbished again. It remained on pier until 1955, when the decision was taken to demolish it and replace it with a more modern complex. Local architects Skipper and Corliss were engaged to design the new pavilion, which opened on the 2nd of May 1956 by the Duke of Edinburgh. It was in effect an entertainment centre: 2 dance floors, restaurants and bars, a theatre and a glass tower, locally referred to as the Space Tower, offering panoramic views along the coast, out to sea and the town centre. There was a miniature railway running from the landward end of the pier near the putting green up to the pavilion, and it proved to be extremely popular.
So I can remember the miniature railway on the South Pier, but the only trouble is It was so low you could not see over the wall, and it was just the experience of being on it really, and not everyone had the chance to do it, so it was great.
It later moved closer to the boating lake on the Esplanade, another much-loved landmark no longer in existence. The dance floors filled every weekend as the entertainments varied from live bands to disco. Artists such as the Rolling Stones, Freddie and the Dreamers and the Swinging Blue Jeans all performed.
I think I can remember the swinging 60s when all the groups used to come to Lowestoft. They used to come to the Royal Hotel, which was at the end of the South Pier, and to the pavilion on the pier. And I can remember vividly going to the Royal Hotel to see the Rolling Stones. And again later, about a year or 18 months later, they came to the South Pier. So I think Lowestoft has a claim to fame that they were first introduced to the Rolling Stones.
In the mid-1970s, major alterations took place as the landward end buildings were replaced by what we see today, a leisure centre, and the pavilion was improved. There were family amusement rides added to the pier, a bouncy castle, and the South Pier Fishing Club welcomed new members.
The South Pier had great memories for me when I was younger. My father had rides at the back of the pier. There was a lot going on in them days. Lowestoft still had a good fishing fleet. Also, you had the smell of the sea, you had the noise behind you. Elton John, Kiki D #1. Trawlers going in and out, people fishing up the pier. Me, myself, joined the South Pier Fishing Club in the mid-70s, me and my friend Stuart. Absolutely fantastic, loved every minute of it. Fond memories and cherished to keep them.
Structural concerns caused the seaward end to be closed in 1987. 2 years later, the Space Tower and complex were pulled down, never to be replaced. And today, the family entertainment complex offers food, drink, bowling and the latest gaming machines. But there's little else save the RNLI shop.